We've not been at the racetrack for over half a year now. It's difficult for us to know how that's really going to affect us in Austria because none of us have ever been away for that long. But there are some benefits and there's some negatives. So on the negative side, we haven't done our work for a long time. We haven't been there tuning the car. We haven't got used to running it in a session. And there are areas that we need to make sure we've rehearsed and practiced to be certain that we're not going to be rusty. But on the positive side, we've actually had a lot of time to get ready for this. And if you think of how winter testing flows into Melbourne, we come off winter testing, we've only got 1 week at the factory, there's an awful lot of work, it's a hive of activity here, getting all the parts ready to get 2 cars on the grid in Melbourne. And there isn't long to digest all the results from those 6 days of winter testing and prepare for that first race. Now on the contrary here, we've got a couple of weeks to understand more about that data from Barcelona, to think about how we're going to prepare for the race, and also for the engineers to discuss things with the drivers so that they can make sure that they're on the same page. But in reality, we just need to get there and see how we go. The race in Melbourne was obviously cancelled quite suddenly, so when we were packing up for that race, we didn't think it would be so long until we actually got to look at the bits back here in Brackley. But all of that freight was packaged. When it got back here, we were in lockdown in the country. Also, Formula One had shut down, so we weren't allowed to work, and we couldn't actually open it all up and check that all the bits were okay. The big concern for us there is just if things get damp. There's a lot of steel parts, particularly with the PU, and if there is any damp in there, it can cause rust, and that's a major problem. Thankfully, all of that was actually okay, but it was one of the things that could have been a significant issue for us, given the complications of the lockdown and the shutdown.
The trackside operations will be quite different this year. We'll be limited to 80 personnel inside the paddock compared to previous years of over 130, which includes marketing, partner services, catering, plus the operational team. Of the 80, 60 personnel will be allowed to be operational, which means they can physically touch the car, engineer the car, or enhance the performance. Social distancing is going to be very tricky this year when you're working around the car. We're going to be very reliant on PPE, plus the COVID testing, which will be done every few days at the track and before we set off. We'll be wearing masks when around the car, plus screens when we're installing the driver in the car. The pinch points when working around the car are generally when you're coming off the grid. You should imagine there's 40, 50 personnel per team, all trying to filter through 1 small or 2 small gaps. The FIA and the teams have agreed to limit the numbers of people who go to the grid, and for the last 3 minutes we're only allowed 8 personnel around each car, so which is enough for a blanket each, the jacks, and firing the car up. Also, when you enter the paddock in the morning, the teams are going to make sure that they social distance, because normally everyone tries to arrive about the same time, which won't work when there's 1,000 people trying to enter the paddock.
There's not long to go before we're going to be in Austria in the garage building the cars, and we've been trying to make use of this block of time since we came out of the shutdown and before we travelled to get as well prepared as possible. The big bit of that was the 2-day test at Silverstone with both race drivers with our 2018 car, and that allowed us to understand how all the elements about being COVID secure at the track, making sure that we don't risk anyone transmitting the virus, can sit alongside the work that we need to do to prepare the cars and to engineer them and to go and race them. So that was a very useful few days, and we laid the garage out exactly as it will be in Austria, so you could really get a feel for the space and how everything goes together. And there's some changes that we will make ahead of that, but it was a really beneficial bit of work. The other good bit of it was both drivers got a chance to do a good number of laps. It's a long time since they've been in the car, and just getting back to the feeling of being in a Formula One car, controlling it on a limit, that's hopefully all going to put us in a good place when we actually get into Austria.
Other areas where we discovered social distancing was difficult was around the back of the panelling, which was all the sub-assemblies are happening. So instead of having small department areas where a gearbox is kept or composite parts, we've made it a little bit more open plan to get more fresh air going through the garage. Also, FOM, who give you the garage area, have allowed the teams to expand in Austria by 4 meters externally, which allows people to be further away. And in Budapest, we're allowed to extend the garage by 7 meters, which is a fairly big footprint to allow the teams to have bigger areas for each department.
Going back to the track, a lot is going to be different. We need to make sure that we are COVID secure, and that changes how you work, it changes the whole environment. But getting some experience of that ahead of actually arriving in Austria was really good, because it should all feel a bit more normal to us. But that aside, we've also got to get ready on the engineering side. We've been doing work with the drivers in the simulator. Obviously, they can play at home on games, but they're nowhere near as realistic as the simulator is to really get back into it. And obviously, they got plenty of laps under their belt on those 2 days at Silverstone, which has helped them sort of get back into the feeling of driving the car and pushing the car to the limit.
Before leaving for the events, each team member will be tested for COVID within 72 hours of boarding a plane or jumping in a car. When we're at the track, we will do the COVID testing between every 4 and every 5 days. Obviously, there's still some risk there. We're trying to mitigate this by having one big team bubble, but also having some smaller departmental bubbles. And contact with the driver is going to be very, very limited to maybe 1 or 2 people. As you all know, an army marches on its stomach. And normally we have a beautiful motorhome at the European races. For the European rounds in 2020, we will not be allowed this. FOM are giving each team their own designated area, which used to be the paddock club, but now it's each team's catering zone, and we'll have our own catering staff. During the events, all team members will wear face masks. Generally, this is not a big issue, apart from the people who wear spectacles like myself and they fog up. Also, it means you can't open your phone because it doesn't recognize your face. But another issue is when we're using the radio. This is a new challenge for us. It's a bit more muffled than it was before, but we are putting perspex panels between each person on the center console and the pit wall and the engineering office. One of the biggest issues we found during the Silverstone test was you're very reliant on facial expression, and obviously with a mask, it's very difficult to read what people are saying without actually saying it. So you're looking at the eyes. The people who work around a Formula One car, it's a bit like a ballet, and you try and understand how it comes together. Having seen the difficulties we had at Silverstone, a lot of it is just looking. We're going to have to master some hand signals or raised eyebrows for this season.
With the very late start to the calendar, there's obviously some races that sit in very different points, and Barcelona might be one good example. Normally that race is in May. It's never particularly hot, but now we're going to go right in the middle of the summer in August, and we would expect temperatures in the mid-30s. Perhaps that's going to put the track temperature well into the 50s, and it's always a track where it's difficult to keep the tyres cool. So there are problems like that will crop up. Perhaps the bigger challenge though for us is that we've got a good idea what the start of the season will look like. That block of races in Europe, we've got a pretty good idea how it's going to look at the back end of the season as well, with Bahrain and Abu Dhabi. What we don't know is what we're going to get in between those, and that makes it difficult from a planning point of view, because you need to know what sort of circuits you're going to know where you want to be in terms of wing level. And also, if you don't know what the calendar looks like, it's quite hard to plan any update packages, because you want to try and deliver them to the points in the calendar where you've got the most races, where you can get the most benefit. So this year, for the first time, we're going to be racing on the same track twice, and that's on successive weekends. And at the moment, we've got that in Austria, and we've also got it in Silverstone. It's a bit difficult to know what to expect and how we're going to structure the program. But if the weather's the same and the tyres are the same, there's not so much more that you can learn, and that might be an opportunity for us to look at a few test items. From the driver's point of view though, qualifying and the race, well, those are perhaps the sessions where they learn the most about driving style. Certainly in the race, they can try things across the different stints. They're always learning and trying to improve. So for them, there might be things that they've picked up on Saturday and Sunday that they want to have a look at on the Friday. But I'm pretty sure the programs will be a bit different. You'll have seen that in Silverstone, they've actually made the second race softer tyres. So although we'll have done a lot of homework on Friday, we will understand a lot about the degradation from the race itself. There is going to be a new compound there that we've got to make sure we learn about that and do the right work. Like many things, we've never experienced it before, so it will be a bit of a learning curve, but trying to understand how we can take the most of the opportunities that presents.
One of the real positives during this virus for me is the way the teams have all worked together alongside the FIA and FOM to try and come up with solutions. There's been no competitive edge. It's all about what can we do to help each other go back racing, and it's been great to work with them, as well as the ventilator projects that some of the teams have been involved in. It makes you proud to be in Formula One, and especially with Mercedes F1.